The pipes above Cargo Bay 12 had not been cleaned in years. Dust sat thick on the metal. Old grease had turned hard. The smell of fuel and cold recycled air filled everything. It was a miserable place to hide. Sura had been hiding there for 11 days. She was small, even for a Sorvani. Copper-gold scales, each one no bigger than a thumbnail. Wings tucked flat against her back. Eyes the color of old amber, watching everything below with the focus of a creature that had learned, early, that size was not protection. The smuggler who had stolen her from her colony had not come back. She had waited 4 days before she accepted this. He was not coming back. She was alone on Havith 9, a docking station orbiting a gas giant so large it filled half the viewport when she had dared to look. The station was loud and graceless and full of species she did not trust. She was hungry. She was cold. She would not show it. Below her, humans moved crates. They were small creatures by galactic standards, soft-skinned, quick-moving, always talking. The Sorvani elders said humans were a young species. Unremarkable. They had been in the compact for less than a century, and most of the older species still forgot they existed. Sura watched them anyway. It was something to do. That was when the one called Roan walked in. She noticed him the way she noticed everything. First as movement, then as detail. Medium height, dark jacket, worn at the elbows. He walked like someone who had spent too many years on ships, a slight roll in the step, body used to floors that moved. He was carrying a thermal regulator that did not belong to his cargo manifest. She had memorized the manifests out of boredom. He crossed to Bay 12's secondary storage wall, crouched, and opened the panel on a unit that had been blinking a warning light for 3 days. Nobody had touched it. The cargo inside, biological samples from the look of the casing, would freeze within another day. He worked quietly. No complaints. No performance. He had tools in his jacket pocket already, like he had come prepared, like he had simply decided on his way past that this was going to be fixed. It took him about 20 minutes. When he was done, he closed the panel, stood, and brushed dust from his knees. Then he reached into his bag, took out a ration packet, and set it on a crate below the pipes where Sura was perched. He did not look up. "In case something small is hungry up there," he said, to nobody. His voice was low, not unkind. Then he picked up his tools and walked out. Sura did not move for a long time. He had smelled her, or heard her. Some human sense she had underestimated. He had known something was up there, and he had left food and walked away without trying to catch her or call anyone or make any kind of event of it at all. She stared at the ration packet. She did not eat it. Not yet. She had her pride. She watched the bay for another hour. Other workers came through. 2 of them walked directly past the storage unit Roan had repaired without glancing at it. One of them had been on shift when the warning light first came on 3 days ago. He had looked at it, noted it, and kept walking. Roan had come in off his own route, with his own tools, and fixed it. She thought about that. At some point the lights dimmed to night cycle. The bay went quiet. Sura climbed down from the pipes slowly, stretching wings she had kept folded too long. She crossed to the crate. She sniffed the ration packet once. She ate it. It was not particularly good food. Humans ate strange things. But it was warm, because the packet was self-heating, and she had not been warm in 11 days. She sat there in the dim cargo bay for a while, wings loose, scales catching the faint orange glow of the storage units. She thought about the man who fixed things that were not his problem. She thought about the way he had spoken to empty air, making sure whatever was hiding felt less like a target and more like a guest. In the morning, she learned his ship was called the Havith Mule, and it was scheduled to depart at the 6th hour. She watched it go from the far viewport. A battered mid-range freighter, nothing distinguished about it, sliding out of the dock and into the dark. Something moved in her chest. She had no name for it yet. She told herself she was simply calculating travel options. The station was not safe for her alone. She needed to move. It was practical. It was only practical. 3 days later, she was on a freight shuttle heading in the same direction as the Havith Mule, having traded a stolen power cell to a cargo runner who asked no questions. She told herself, again, that it was practical. She almost believed it. Durek Station smelled like iron and old anger. It was an ore processing hub, built into the body of a dead asteroid, expanded over centuries by whoever needed it and maintained by whoever was cheapest. The walls were the color of rust. The corridors were narrow. The workers moved with their heads down, which Sura had learned, in her short life, was what people did when something had beaten the straightness out of them. She arrived 4 hours after the Havith mule docked. Her freight runner had been slower. She had spent the journey in a storage compartment behind a wall of grain canisters, which were uncomfortable but warm, and she had used the time to think carefully about what she was doing. She had not reached any satisfying conclusions. She found his scent in the main docking corridor almost immediately. It was a strange thing, a human scent. Warm. Biological in a way most synthetic habitat species were not. Something underneath it she had no name for. Not a chemical marker. Not a pheromone her kind catalogued. Just a quality. Like the smell of something that repaired things. She followed it through 3 corridors and into the worker district. Durek's dominant management species was Keth. Fur-limbed, ridge-backed, organized by hierarchy so rigid that their language had 17 different words for superior and none for friend. They ran the station's private charter, which meant they set the rules. The rules were, as far as Sura could determine after 1 hour of observation, designed to extract money from everyone with less power than a Keth foreman. She found Roan near the docking clearance office. He was standing at the edge of a group of human workers, 6 of them, shift laborers by their uniforms, who were trying to get their clearance approved so they could access their wages for the week. The Keth foreman behind the desk was explaining, slowly, that there was a processing fee. The fee had not existed last week. It was new. It was, the foreman said, completely legal under the station's private charter. The humans looked at each other. They didn't have the fee. The fee was close to 1/3 of their week's wages. Roan was quiet through all of this. He stood slightly back. He had his hands in his jacket pockets and his face was doing something difficult to read. Not angry, exactly. More like a person who had found a mathematics problem where the answer kept coming out wrong and he was running the numbers again. Then he reached into his jacket and took out a recording device. Old model, physical, clearly his own. He held it up, visible, at the level of his shoulder. He turned it on. The small red light blinked. "Just so everyone is clear," Roan said, in a very calm voice. "I'm documenting this transaction. Name of the foreman, station designation, fee amount, worker IDs, date, and time. This will go into a compact labor record. That's a public filing. Anyone can access it." The Keth foreman stared at him. "You are not part of this transaction," the foreman said. "No," Roan agreed. "I'm just standing here, recording." A silence settled over the office. Sura, tucked in the ventilation grate above, watched the foreman's posture change. Not dramatically, just a shift, a recalculation. A compact labor filing meant disclosure forms. Disclosure forms meant oversight. Oversight cost more time than 1 week's processing fee was worth. The foreman approved the clearances. Standard rate. No fee. He didn't say anything to Roan. Roan didn't say anything back. He just turned off the device and put it away. The human workers tried to thank him, and he got visibly uncomfortable in the way people do when gratitude makes them feel like they've been caught doing something embarrassing. He said something dismissive and found a reason to leave. Sura stayed in the grate for a long time after he left. She had seen disputes resolved before. In Sorvani culture, disputes went to elders, who weighed status and bloodline. Among the Keth, disputes resolved in favor of whoever had more hierarchy. The Turvik used favors and debts, an entire social economy of obligation. Every species she had ever observed resolved conflict through power of some kind. Roan had no power here. He was a human cargo hauler on a Keth-run station. He had a recording device and the knowledge that documentation was more trouble than it was worth. That was all. He had made the cost of cruelty slightly higher than the benefit and then walked away without collecting anything for himself. She climbed down from the grate at night when the corridors were empty. She walked to the viewport near the docking arm and looked out at the Havith mule sitting in its berth. Battered. Unremarkable. She thought, one more planet. Just one more. She only wanted to understand what she was seeing. That was reasonable. That was the behavior of a careful mind gathering data. She was a Sorvani. She was careful and precise, and she did not do things without reasons. She found a cargo hauler leaving for the same system as the mule's next log destination and negotiated passage with the last of her stolen power cells. She told herself she was being careful and precise. She told herself this several times. She almost managed to sound convincing. Vareth Colony sat at the edge of everything. It was the kind of settlement that appeared on compact maps in small font, almost as an afterthought. Dry hills, wide sky the color of pale copper in the early hours. Fields that the colonists had spent 2 generations convincing to grow things they needed. The kind of place built entirely by people who had decided that a hard patch of ground at the edge of charted space was worth their one life. It smelled like soil and warm rock, and after stations made of metal and recycled air, it hit Sura's senses like a sound after long silence. She followed his scent through the edge markets without difficulty. He had been here before. People knew him. She could tell by the way they called his name across stalls, by the way a vendor pressed something wrapped in cloth into his hands without being asked and waved away his attempt to pay. She stayed in the shadows between the market structures and watched. He was different here. Not a different person, but a different version of the same person. Looser. The tension he carried on the stations, the quiet alertness of someone always calculating the room, was still there, but quieter. He smiled more. When an old woman on a porch called to him, he sat down without being asked and accepted a cup of something hot, and they talked for a long while in low voices. The old woman had the look of someone waiting for news that was a long time coming. He didn't try to fix that. He just sat with her. Sura watched that too. She was not careful enough. She had been following him across 3 planets, and she had grown used to watching, and she had stopped calculating the angles quite so precisely, and she came 3 meters too close around the side of a barrel near the south end of the market. A child saw her. 6 years old, approximately, by human development standards. Small even for her species. She had been crouched behind the same barrel chasing something that had disappeared into the dust, and when she turned she was face to face with Sura at a distance of less than half a meter. Sura went completely still. This was a threat assessment situation. She ran through options quickly. Flee. Possible, but movement draws attention. Display threat. Unnecessary and disproportionate. Freeze and wait. The child had already seen her. There was no good option. She had made an error. The child looked at her with wide, dark eyes for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, with the particular seriousness that young humans sometimes deployed, "You're very pretty." Sura did not know how to respond to that. She heard footsteps. Roan had been alerted by the child's voice. He came around the barrel and stopped. He looked at Sura. She looked back at him. He was the first person she had been this close to in weeks who was not trying to catch her, sell her, or file a report about her. He just looked at her the way he looked at the broken thermal regulator. Steady. Taking inventory. "You've been following me," he said. Not a question. Not accusatory. He said it the way someone states a fact they have worked out and are now confirming. Haveth 9. Durek. Now here. Sura said nothing. She was deciding whether to run. He sat down on the ground. Not slowly, not theatrically. He just folded himself down until he was sitting cross-legged in the dust, which put his eyes below hers instead of above, and he reached into his bag. He took out a ration packet, better than the one he had left on the crate, she noticed, and set it in the dust between them. Then he opened his own food and ate it, and did not look at her directly. The child had drifted back toward the market, bored by the absence of action. A vendor shouted something in the distance. Somewhere a machine made a grinding sound and stopped. Roan ate his food. Sura watched him. She was running numbers. He had not called anyone. He had not reached for her. He had not pulled out a recording device or a scanner or made any attempt to document or capture or report. He had simply removed himself as a looming presence and waited. 8 minutes passed. She ate the food. He noticed, because he noticed everything, but he didn't make anything of it. He looked out at the fields instead, squinting a little against the pale light, and she had the impression he would have sat there all afternoon if that was what it took. When his crewmate, a large 4-armed Turvik named Davin, found them later and asked Roan what he thought the dragon wanted, Roan was quiet for a moment. "I think she's trying to decide something," he said. Davin asked what. Roan said he didn't know, but I figure I shouldn't make the decision harder for her. That night, Sura slept on the windowsill of Roan's rented room. The window faced the fields. The sky on Vareth was very dark and very full of stars, and the air was warm, and she had not felt this close to safe since before the smuggler took her. She did not sleep deeply, usually. She had not slept deeply in months. She slept deeply. In the morning she was awake before he was, and she had moved back to the far end of the sill by the time he opened his eyes. She composed herself. She looked out at the fields with great interest as though she had been doing that all night. She did not leave. The compact patrol vessel arrived on the second morning. Sura saw it from the windowsill before anyone else was awake. A clean white hull, the kind that meant official business. It settled into the colony's small landing pad with the confidence of a ship that did not need permission. She knew what it was for. She had known, in some part of herself, that this was coming. The smuggler who had stolen her had eventually been caught. When they traced his cargo records, they would have found her colony's name in the theft report. The Sorvani elders would have filed with the compact. It was the correct thing to do. She watched the patrol officer walk toward the colony's main building and felt something cold move through her that was not the morning air. Roan was at the landing pad when the officer came to speak to him. She did not know how he had ended up being the point of contact, but he had the kind of face that people brought problems to, so perhaps it simply happened that way. She watched from the roof of the nearest building, low and flat against the warm tiles. The officer was human, efficient, not unkind. The situation was simple, legally. A young Sorvani had been stolen from her colony by a cargo smuggler now in compact custody. The Sorvani elders had submitted a formal recovery request. As a minor under compact law, Sura was considered a ward of her colony. The patrol vessel would return her. Roan listened to all of this without interrupting. Then he asked for 10 minutes. The officer looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded and stepped back toward the landing pad, giving him space. Roan walked to the base of the building. He did not look up at the roof. He sat on the low stone wall at the building's edge and spoke in the direction of the air. "I think you heard that," he said. Sura did not move. "I can't stop them," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't have the legal standing, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He paused. "Your colony was probably scared for you. The people who filed that report were probably scared." He looked at his hands. "Whatever you've been doing, following me around the compact, I don't know what you were looking for. Maybe you found it. Maybe you didn't." He turned the thought over. "You're the bravest small thing I've ever seen. I just wanted to say that." He stopped talking. He waited. Sura stayed flat on the roof for a long moment. Every calculation she ran led to the same place. She was a legal minor. She had no standing. She would be taken back to her colony, which was safe, which was where she belonged, and she would spend the next several decades growing up in the correct and appropriate way, and she would think, sometimes, about a man who sat on the ground and waited. She climbed down from the roof. She walked across the dust to where he sat. She stopped at his feet and looked up at him. "You never asked what I wanted," she said. He looked down at her. He looked surprised to hear her speak, which was fair. She had not done it before, in his presence. "What do you want?" he said. She considered how to say it. She had been thinking about it across 3 planets, and the answer was not simple, and she was not sure she had the right words in compact standard to hold it. "I want to know why you fixed the regulator," she said. "On Haveth 9. No one asked you. No one would have known if you had kept walking. The cargo inside was not yours." He looked at her. She could see him thinking about it honestly, not reaching for a polite answer. "Because it was broken," he said. "And I could fix it." He paused. "That's all." Sura held that answer for 3 seconds. Then she performed the Veth. It was a small motion. A Sorvani who did not know what to look for would have seen nothing. She lowered her head, not a bow, but a specific angle, a specific depth. She raised her right forepaw and pressed it flat against her chest, over the place where her heart sat under her scales. She held it for 1 breath. Then she straightened. Davin, standing 30 meters away in the shadow of the colony's storage building, made a sound like a person who had just watched something fall from a very great height. His forearms dropped to his sides. He stared. The patrol officer, who had been watching from the landing pad, went still. She walked over. Her voice had changed completely. Precise now. A little careful. She stopped. Started again. That was a Veth gesture. Roan looked at her. "I don't know what that means." "It means," the officer said slowly, "that she is a bonded adult under Sorvani law." She looked at her own filing document. Under Compact Charter, a bonded Sorvani is recognized as a legal adult regardless of age. The recovery order applies to an unattached minor. She looked at Sura. It does not apply to her anymore. A silence sat over the landing pad. The officer looked at her paperwork for a long moment. Then she folded it. I'll log the case as resolved, she said quietly. Colony will be notified she is safe and has bonded. She looked at Roan one more time, with an expression he couldn't quite read, and walked back to her ship. Roan looked down at Sura. Did you just do something I should know about? He said. Yes, Sura said. Are you going to tell me what? She looked out at the pale fields of Vareth. Eventually, she said. Davin sat down heavily on a crate behind them and put 2 of his 4 hands over his face. Nobody asked him why. 3 days out of Vareth, the Havith mule received a transmission. It came through the Sorvani diplomatic channel, which Roan did not know he had access to until the comm system lit up with markings he had never seen before. Davin took one look at the header and went very quietly to the other end of the ship. The message was from an elder Sorvani named Orth, Sura's grandmother figure, though the Sorvani did not use that word. She spoke in compact standard, carefully, with the weight of someone choosing each word like it was being carved. She said that Sura had performed the Veth. She explained what this meant for someone who did not know. The Veth was permanent. It could not be undone by custom, by law, or by will. It was the highest act a Sorvani could commit. It was not servitude, and it was not ownership. It was, the elder said, the closest word in any language was partner, though that word was not quite large enough. She said that Sura was the youngest of her line to ever perform the Veth. Then she said the thing that mattered. She said, a Sorvani, bonded, shares the shape of the life they have chosen. A Sorvani lived for centuries. The first century was the brightest, the time of fullest mind and fastest growth and deepest experience. Sura had chosen to give her first century to a human, a species that lived at the far edge of its length, perhaps 100 years. Rome would be gone before Sura reached her full growth. He would be gone before she was, in Sorvani terms, fully adult. The elder said, we do not ask you to send her back. We know the Veth. We know it cannot be asked back once given. We ask only that you understand what she has given you. We ask that you know the size of it. The transmission ended. Roan sat in the pilot's chair for a long time. The stars outside did not move perceptibly. The ship made the sounds ships made. He did not move either. Then he got up, walked to the small bunk room, and found Sura curled on his bunk in the way she had started doing without discussion 3 days ago. He sat in the chair across from her. She opened one eye. He said, why? Not a long question. Just that word, with everything in it. She uncurled slowly. She sat up. She looked at him with her amber eyes, and for a long moment she did not speak. And he had the feeling she was finding a way to say something she had been carrying for a very long time across a very long distance. I have watched many species, she said, across many stations. Many years, for someone my age. She paused. The Turvik help those who can repay them. They are careful calculators. They remember every debt. The Keth help those above them in rank and take from those below, because that is the shape of their world. The Paulani help those who share their faith. They are generous, but the generosity has a door, and the door only opens one way. She shifted. Her tail wound around her forepaws. Every species I observed helped according to a rule. Some rule about who deserves it, or who can pay it back, or who belongs to the right group. Her voice was precise, not cold, just honest. I had decided, before my colony, before the smuggler, that this was simply what intelligence produced. Systems of exchange. That kindness was always a transaction, even when the currency was invisible. She looked at him directly. Then I watched you fix something broken that had no reward. I watched you shame a bully without raising your hand, and walk away without keeping anything for yourself. I watched you sit on the ground in the dust of a market and wait for a frightened creature to feel safe, because you thought the decision she was making deserved space. Her voice had not changed in volume. It had changed in some other way. I watched you when you thought no one was watching. That is the truest version of what a person is. Roan was quiet. You are the first thing I have found in the galaxy, she said, that made me feel the galaxy might be all right. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the floor. His voice, when he used it, was rough in the way voices got when something was pressing from the inside. Sura, I'm going to get old. I'm already going in that direction. He turned a hand over. I'm going to get slow and forget things, and eventually I'm going to be gone. You're going to have centuries after that. Long centuries. I don't know if I'm worth. I did not ask you if you were worth it, she said. The words were quiet. They were not sharp. They were simply certain, the way a fact is certain. I decided, she said. I watched carefully, and I thought carefully, and I decided. That is what I do. I am a Sorvani. He covered his face with both hands. He sat like that for a while and did not apologize for it. She waited. She was very good at waiting now. She had learned it, somewhat, from him. Then she stepped off the bunk. She crossed the small distance between them and settled on his shoulder, her weight barely there, her scales warm against the side of his neck. She folded her wings flat. She did not say anything more. She didn't need to. What had broken him was not the bond, not the weight of what the elder had said, not the enormity of a century promised. What had broken him was simpler than that, and it went deeper. She had watched him tired and unremarkable, hauling cargo through the unglamorous edges of the galaxy, fixing things no one thanked him for, standing up for people who would forget his name, and she had decided that what she saw was worth the brightest century of her life. He had never once thought of himself as worth watching. She had watched anyway. She had decided anyway. The Haveth mule moved through the dark between stars, and the man sat still, and the small copper-gold dragon on his shoulder held on, and neither of them said anything for a very long time, and it was enough. 6 months after Vareth, Roan knew 17 words in Sorvani. His pronunciation was terrible. This was not his own assessment. Sura corrected him every single time, with the patience of someone who had decided that patience was required even when it was difficult. She would say the word. He would repeat it. She would close her eyes for a moment. She would say the word again. He would try again. She would say, with great precision, that is not the sound. He would try again. He never stopped trying. She noted this in the private part of herself where she kept observations. He was bad at the language, and he knew he was bad at the language, and he continued anyway, every day, making no real progress and refusing to stop. She was not sure whether this was admirable or baffling. She had concluded it was both. A year after Vareth, something happened that she had not planned. A minor human colony, 3 systems out from compact central space, was in a resource dispute. They had applied for agricultural supply allocation that was being denied on a technicality in the charter. The technicality was real, but the denial was not, in Sura's assessment, fair. The colony needed the supply. The supply existed. The paperwork was being used as a wall. Sura, as a bonded adult Sorvani, had the right to address the Compact Council. It was a right rarely used by young Sorvani. It was never used by Sorvani on behalf of humans. She requested the floor. The council chamber was large and full of old species, and she was small and new, and she did not let any of that change her posture. She spoke about what she had observed across 3 planets. She did not speak about humans as a category. She did not give statistics or history or political argument. She spoke about one man, and what he did when no one was watching. You ask what humans are, she said, to a chamber of species who had been in the compact for centuries. I will not give you their history. You already have their history, and it has not answered the question, or you would not still be asking it. She paused. Follow one quietly. Do not tell them you are watching. Watch what they do when there is nothing to gain. Watch what they fix. Watch who they sit with in the dust. She paused again. I did this. Across 3 planets. I recommend it. The allocation passed. Roan, when she told him, was quiet for a while. Then he said, You didn't have to do that. I know, she said. That is the point. He looked at her with an expression she had catalogued over the past year. Something between exasperation and something warmer that did not have a clean name in any language she spoke. He was getting better at having feelings and worse at hiding them. She thought this was probably healthy. 5 years after Vareth, Davin took a photograph of them without asking. They were sitting on the cargo ramp of the Haveth mule, which had new panels now on the port side, finally, because Roan had stopped deferring the repair, and they were arguing about the most efficient route through the Durek system. Roan was saying one thing. Sura, on his shoulder, was explaining at length why he was wrong. Davin raised the device. The light clicked. Later he showed it to Roan, who said it was a terrible photograph. Davin said it was for posterity. Roan said posterity didn't need to see him losing an argument to a dragon. Sura said she would like a copy. Davin made her 3 copies. She was larger now, not by much. Sorvani grew slowly, but her scales had deepened. Less copper, more gold. The wingspan, when she stretched, was impressive in a small room. she still rode his shoulder. It was not a necessity. It was a preference. She had decided not to be embarrassed about preferences. They came back to Haveth 9 on the 7th year. The station had changed some and not changed some. The cargo bay still smelled like fuel and recycled air. The pipes above Bay 12 were still dusty. Ren, the customs officer who had processed their departure years ago, was still at her post, promoted now, a senior position, but she still worked the docking intake on long shifts because she said it kept her honest. She looked up when Roan came through the checkpoint. She remembered him. She had a good memory for faces, and his was the kind of face that stayed with you not because it was remarkable, but because of what it had been doing the last time you saw it. She looked at the small copper-gold dragon on his shoulder. The dragon looked back with calm gold eyes, performing a brief, systematic assessment of the checkpoint area the way she apparently assessed every new space she entered. Ren had heard things, in 7 years, about a Sorvani who had addressed the Compact Council, about a speech that did not argue policies but described a person. She had not connected it to the cargo hauler who once fixed a thermal regulator for no reason. She connected it now. "Is that," she started. Roan gave a small, slightly helpless shrug. "She followed me," he said. 3 planets. Ren looked at Sura. "Why?" she asked. Sura turned her head. She considered the question. It was a short question with a long answer, and she had learned, over 7 years, to find the part of the long answer that fit in the space people were offering. "I was looking for something worth following," she said. She did not look away. "I found it." Roan made a quiet, embarrassed sound and walked on through the checkpoint. Sura rode his shoulder with her wings folded and her eyes forward, composed as always, watching the station with her old careful attention, ready to note whatever needed noting. She had been doing this for 7 years. She planned to do it for a great many more. Some things, once decided, stayed decided. That was what it meant to be a Sorvani. That was what the Veth was. She had chosen carefully. She had chosen right.